Brooklyn Independent Television.
Hey, it's a big
But
vote.
will Brooklyn really go for it?
Why don't we just agree to disagree?
Yeah, that's really gonna fly in
Well, that's a
Brooklyn.
good question.
No. Listen.
That's exactly the point I wanted to make.
So we've done shows about stop, question, and frisk before. We've had on academics and people in policy making and some people who are concerned with justice and lawyers and arguing things in court. And there's no doubt that stop and frisk has been in the news a lot, most recently because of a decision by the New York State Appellate Court where they found two stops that the police made that actually resulted in two illegal guns getting off the street to be unconstitutional because the police had no right to stop the kids in the first place because there was no probable cause that's supposed to be in the line of succession before you're stopped, questioned, and frisked. So we wanted to get the perspective of a person who's been on the front lines of stop, question, and frisk, and not just the police, but the young people who it's a reality for every day. So this was sparked by an article in the New York Times that featured a young man who lives in Bushwick, probably about 3 stops away from me on the train. But this guy who's about 17 years old has been stopped 60 times, 6-0 to be clear. This young man, young black guy, was stopped 60 times by the police. So he became an activist. A young man who's an activist against the police stopping him and people who look like him just because they look like they do. And we never really connected with him. So in the midst of all this, we have an intern who's working with us in the summer, a very promising young student who I'm going to introduce to you right now. This is Gerald Huggins, Jr., who's a Bed-Stuy native and also a student athlete at Virginia Union University. But before he went to Virginia University, he was just a guy you'd see on the street in Bed-Stuy, making his way home from school, from football practice. And you'd pass him 100 times on the street and say, hey, or walk right by, but doing your business. But you've also been stopped by the police doing their business.
Doing their business, yeah, that's what you want to call it, their business. Well, if that's their business, then I think they need to change because it's just harassment at the end of the day in my eyes, because if I'm coming home from practice and I got my hoodie on, I'm music in my ears, I'm tired, so my head might be a little low at times, I look suspicious to a cop. And that's not fair to me. That's not fair to anybody, because I know numerous people that have gone through this. Okay. So I could name one incident where it was my senior year of high school. I'm walking home. This is after the coldest night of practice we had. It probably was, I think it was Jefferson game.
Okay.
We were walking home, and near my house, I used to live on McDonough in Stuyvesant. Nice neighborhood, nothing really goes on over there.
Right.
I'm walking to my house, and a cop, I mean, you see, you know, when you see something, you're not really sure, but then you saw someone say, hey, but I couldn't hear him, but you could see his hand. Yeah. I kept walking, because I'm like, you don't turn back. When you walk forward, you don't really turn back. It's not safe. Then, this guy touches me, and my reaction is protect myself, so I'm about to swing, and then, okay, it's a police officer.
Right.
So that would have happened, that would have been a big issue. I probably wouldn't be here right now.
Be a different story.
Really good story. And he told me to get against the wall. And my little quiet neighborhood where nothing happens. He tells me to get against the wall, and he asked me, where am I going? I look at him like, where am I going? My house is right on McDonough, and I got stopped on Bainbridge. That's 2 blocks away from my house, 2 blocks away from me, just being able to go home and see my family. Right. And he just stops me, asks where I'm going. And he said I look like a possible suspect. And in my head, I'm like, how? Because I'm black, tall, got my hoodie on, I look suspicious. Yeah. You know, just one of them sad situations that I had to go through, and a lot of people go through, probably way more than me. And that's just in Brooklyn. And then as I went down to school in Richmond, you know, I had to deal with the Commonwealth law. A Commonwealth state is, they make up their rules as they go. In my eyes, that's how it seems. Like, yeah. It's hard to live. I didn't know that. It's hard living down there because, you know, a cop could say anything, and usually they're right. So situations like there will be a party and an incident happens and they hear black kids are there, they gonna come there ready to just, you know, calm everything down. They come there to try and scare and hurt. And that's what they did. They came with tasers, they came with their guns out, came with pepper spray loaded, and they didn't say a word. They just came spray, pepper spray.
So you are in a college situation now. You're living in a different state.
Yes, sir. Student
athlete. Do your peers have stories or incidences with stop and frisk as well, or is this a New York phenomenon?
Oh no, it's everywhere. I have people I know from Philadelphia. Yeah. People I know from Jersey, Alabama. I know someone from Compton. You know how that is over there in California. So I know a little bit of everybody, and they all go through it all. And it's usually people with my complexion.
It comes out of this broken windows theory, which emerged about 25 years ago. The idea was that neighborhoods would be safer if there weren't broken windows, if the activity on the street was safe. So even though broken windows themselves don't cause crime, the idea is that you want no broken windows, you want nice grassy areas, you don't want kids hanging out on the corner. So even if the kids hanging out on the corner aren't committing crimes per se, it makes the neighborhood bad and increases the likelihood of crime or the perception of crime. So stop and frisk started in New York City in about 2003, where police officers would stop people who looked suspicious, hoping that they would get an arrest, and that would decrease crime. Unfortunately, since the program has been implemented, most people, about 90% of people who have been stopped, have not committed any crimes. So it was supposed to improve the quality of life, but in fact, it's hurt the quality of life because many, many people have been stopped who have been innocent for no reason.
So you've been on the street. What's the sort of practice of the stop and frisk?
Well, first, it's important to understand what's the legal regime that surrounds stop and frisk. For a police officer to stop a pedestrian on the street and question him or her, the officer has to have reasonable suspicion that that person is committing a crime or has committed a crime. The police can only actually pat down the outside of that person's clothing or frisk the person if that officer has reasonable suspicion that person has a weapon. And then an officer can only go inside a person's pocket if the officer feels a weapon or some hard object that could possibly be a weapon.
And that's the strict letter of the law.
Exactly, exactly. But what we found on the street, I talked to many, many young people all over New York City in the most heavily policed precincts, East New York, Brownsville, South Bronx, East Harlem, and what I had been hearing from these individuals is they were just walking down the street. None of them that I had talked to had just committed a crime or were planning on committing a crime, according to them. Yeah. And what happened is the police stopped them, asked them a few questions, and all of a sudden, within minutes, the frisking started. And most of these people, the most, I guess, definite object that they had in their pocket, the most touchable object was a cell phone, a hard object. So the police officers in more than a dozen of these cases that I talked to reached inside their pocket, took out the cell phone, or in one case it was a bottle of cologne, realized it's not a weapon, put the object back, but then kept on putting their hands in the person's other pockets, their back pockets, front pockets, shoes, socks, underwear, reaching hands inside the crotch area of individuals.
Which is not allowed.
Exactly. At that point, those are straight out illegal, unconstitutional searches that violate the Fourth Amendment.
Now, if you are stopped and frisked and you're found to not have marijuana and to be innocent, your name is no longer entered into a database, which is a crucial victory. However, it hasn't stopped and frisked. But it's always interesting to me how police officers say, well, this is a good thing, you don't understand, you're a professor, you're a sociologist, like you're not in our neighborhoods, it's not safe in these neighborhoods, we're trying to protect the people in these neighborhoods. But research and data show this is not helping anyone.
And that's absolutely true. There has been no definitive study that has isolated stop and frisks as the reason for why violent crime has dropped in New York City. I mean, law enforcement experts will say it's impossible, actually, to isolate any one factor as the cause. So until the day the police department can definitively prove that stop and frisk are directly causing a decrease in violent crime, this debate is going to rage on. So it's really these young people's word against the police's. And if you look at the police reports that are filed in these cases, a lot of these guys were arrested for marijuana possession because in that search, the police found baggies of marijuana. But if you read the police reports, these young people that I talked to were actually arrested for the misdemeanor of displaying marijuana in public view. And these guys are like, my marijuana was never in public view. It was in my crotch.
Which would mean
or
they
in
would
my
have
shoe.
to be carrying around some form of marijuana, whether it was in a bag or rolled or whatever it is, in public display, pinned to their shirts or in their hands.
And if you think about it, it's nonsensical because these are guys that live in neighborhoods filled with police. These are men who are used to getting stopped, questioned, and frisked routinely. They are the last people you would expect to be walking around with
just
drugs
that dumb, period.
in open view. Yeah. They said I would never be doing that.
Let's get to the numbers game then. This is in the news again because last year there were, over 600,000 stop, question, frisk incidences on the streets of New York. And right now in 2011, we're on par to shatter those numbers.
That's right. That's right. If the first 3 months of 2011 are an accurate reflection of what's going to happen in the next 9 months, then we're going to have 700,000 stops this year. And to put it in some perspective, in 2002, prior to the implementation of this program, there was about 100,000 stops. So since 2002, crime has decreased, yet
because of the stops?
No, not because of the stop and frisk. As crime decreases, the stops increase. It makes no sense. Bob Herbert wrote a great column in the New York Times saying, well, what's going to happen when the crime rate reaches 0? Is everyone going to be stopped and frisked? Because it makes no sense.
Well,
it's
is everyone stopped and frisked now?
No. About 6% of New Yorkers are stopped and frisked. About that much, right? But if you live in Harlem, or if you live in Brownsville, in Brooklyn, about 30% are stopped and frisked. Now, what are the demographics of Harlem and Brownsville? You don't have to be a sociologist to understand those are predominantly African-American neighborhoods. If you are a person of color in the city, particularly a male person of color, you are far more likely to be stopped and frisked.
These aren't areas that are not strangers to crime. So what is the feeling like, you, Elsa, being on the street in the South Bronx and in the other parts of Brooklyn? What's the feeling on the street? Do people feel like, oh, the police are out there doing their job, they're keeping us safe, they're stopping the bad guys? Or is this having a reverse effect and making animosity towards officers?
Well, the people I talked to, and I didn't get to knock on every single door in these precincts, but the people I talked to said this intensive kind of stop and frisk policy is deteriorating the trust between the police and the residents, because these are young men who have grown up getting stopped all the time, feeling that they were doing absolutely nothing wrong except hanging outside their project, hanging outside their apartment building, walking down the street.
So what do people who haven't been versed in stop and frisk, those guys who've not been stopped or have no idea, what kind of interactions you have with them if you guys do share a story or some experiences?
I mean, we're the same, but when it comes to certain situations where we have to deal with cops, you could tell if it came down to the situation was me and him and a cop pull us over, you'll know which one has been pulled over by cops more than once, or it hasn't done to them at all, because they react a certain way. See, me, if a cop pulled me over now, I have the same face. Sometimes I smile. I'm like, it happens all the time. But a guy that hasn't had it done to him before, be more like frigid, shaken, make it look like he did something. You have to keep a calm face when you mess with these cops, man. Because any little, put your hand in your pocket, they can shoot you. They shoot you, you're dead. They say that I felt threatened. And that's it. It's like, it's actually scary, to be honest with you.
So I know that I'm probably only 2 or 3 years older than you are, but when I was a kid, it's a lot. But when I was a kid, we had like Officer Friendly, those guys who would come into school and tell us about stranger danger and all that stuff. And I'm trying to think personally of when I made the shift from seeing police as like, hey, someone you wave to who's in your neighborhood, that's the good guy to protect and serve that you would have wanted to be if you were playing a childhood game, to somebody who, when you see them, the reaction is fear instead of saying, this is somebody who's here to help or a resource that I can turn to. Was there a moment for you or period in your life where you might have made that sort of switch or transition when you started to think of officers as someone's adversarial?
To me, as a young black man in America, the officer is usually the enemy to me. Honestly, I came to the conclusion that the police force is probably one of the biggest gangs in the world. Because honestly, they can do what they want.
Yeah.
I walk down the street, just me and him in the street, he can shoot me, bow, dead. All you gotta do is say, and what can I say? I'm dead. All you have to do is say, he approached me.
Yeah.
And I had the right. You know, all you gotta do is sign a paper. So that's it, and that's over. Like, they do that all the time. You know, you see what happened to Trayvon Martin, and there was another kid. You can't really say a cop. Okay, that's different. But honestly, when you see the things happen to the black youth, it's not other black officers. We all know this. It's Caucasian officers most of the time, and they really try and make life harder for us. It's already hard being a young black man.
Yeah,
already hard enough, and then they just make it harder. And then they wonder why we so angry and why we we just walk around with so much anger sometimes, because we go through it. We go through a lot.
Just in the course of your interviewing about tactics that these young men predominantly employ when the police are around or when dealing on a one-to-one with the police, what are the sort of boots on the ground kind of ways that they deal?
Again, this young man, Antonio Rivera, the moment he steps outside his building, he says his entire demeanor just changes. He goes into a different mode. He has his hood on, he looks forward, he doesn't like making eye contact with any police officer. He just keeps on walking with relaxed purpose. He says he tries not to walk too urgently. He doesn't like to look around. If he makes eye contact with an officer, he does sort of a mental calculation. Is this officer someone who looks like he wants a smile back? Should I nod in acknowledgement? But he's constantly evaluating, what should I do with my face? And how quickly should I walk? And what direction should I walk? And that's a kind of, I guess, I don't walk around New York City feeling that kind of oppression. It is a kind of a mental oppression to be consciously aware of how you're holding yourself, because any little movement of, could arouse the suspicion of an officer. In fact, if you look on a form, it's called the UF-250. It's a form that the police officer fills out when he does a stop and frisk. There is a section where the police officer has to check off the reason for why he made the initial stop. And one of the reasons that you can check off is furtive movements. Okay. What is that? Right. So I'm asking these guys, like, well, what do you think that means? He's like, a lot of times these guys are walking down the street and they feel a police car roll up on them. Yeah, they do a little bit of a double take, or they look surprised, or they kind of want to look away, or they're walking a little more quickly because they're not sure, is the police following me, or are they watching someone beyond me? And they probably do look a little bit furtive. And, that's something that's going to be assessed in this litigation against the police department about the constitutionality of these stops. Is furtive movements, is that, a constitution? Yeah, exactly. Legally sufficient grounds for doing a stop.
Another point that's, I think, proves that these stop and frisk activities have no relation to a decrease in violent crime. They almost never seize a gun. They almost never get a weapon. So just logically, if you were getting weapons and getting guns, maybe that would have an impact on a decrease in violent crime, but it has no relationship. There's never weapons. In fact, Jeffrey Fagan, a professor at Columbia who analyzed the data from a statistical perspective, found that you would have a better chance of getting guns if you just randomly selected people. So it doesn't make any sense. It has no relationship to the decreasing crime rate. The crime rate was decreasing prior to the implementation of the stop and frisk.
Scholars like Jeffrey Fagan said there are far more efficient methods that police have at their disposal to get more guns. Gun buyback operations, gun stings, other types of investigations yield a greater return in guns
or just
than
widening the net. If you're so married to this one particular tactic, then employ it in a greater number of places instead of just in these particular neighborhoods.
Frankly, I mean, you have to. If you employed this tactic in a high-income neighborhood, these are people with money and power who would immediately file lawsuits. They know the disempowered minority youth, minority men who are young are not going to file lawsuits. And if they do, nobody's going to believe them. Their witnesses are going to be discredited. They're not going to be able to hire lawyers. So, of course, they do it to the powerless. For example, the New York Civil Liberty Unions just launched another lawsuit challenging the new practice of police officers stopping and frisking passengers in livery cabs. We know in New York City, only low-income people use livery cabs, because if you live in a middle or high-income neighborhood, you have access to yellow cabs. Yeah. So obviously, stopping and frisking people who are just riding in livery cabs is yet another way to demoralize and demean people of color and poor people and victimize them.
Hearing these young men talk about the police is just so interesting because, you know, I grew up in the suburbs in California. When I see police around, I feel instant safety. Oh, okay, there's police around here. Right. When I would talk to these men on street corners and police cars would go by, or in some cases they literally just stopped, rolled up onto us and were watching us, you could see these young men's, like you could almost feel the hairs on the back of their neck bristling. They're looking very, very cautious all of a sudden. And we're doing something completely legal. We're talking outside, I'm doing an interview, and these young men automatically feel unsafe. And yeah, you know, one young man I interviewed in my story, Antonio Rivera, he's in the 46th precinct in Central Bronx. He said, you know, when me and my friends, when we're walking around and we see police, we smell trouble. We don't feel safe. Now, I want to give the police a fair shake. We don't have a representative here on this panel. They believe that these stop and frisk policies are decreasing crime in New York City. If you look at Antonio Rivera's precinct, the 46th precinct, they have seen murder drop 85% in the last 20 years. It used to be an incredibly violent precinct. And that precinct has one of the highest stop and frisk rates. It also has one of the highest marijuana arrest rates. And the police department says, you know, cracking down on low-level offenses by stopping and frisking individuals all the time and disrupting potentially criminal activity or deterring people, that is what is going to get violent crime down. And look at the statistics. We must be doing something right. That's what the police department will say.
What are some effective sort of strategies moving forward then? What's an alternative to this?
Truthfully, if you really want to decrease crime and decrease the prison population, there's two things you can do. One, you can offer more drug rehabilitation programs, better health care, smaller class sizes. We know dropping out of school is the biggest predictor of winding up in prison and becoming a criminal. So logically, we would want to fund our schools more, build more schools, have smaller classes, more enrichment programs, increase the economy. The more money you spend on law enforcement and on prisons, the more prisoners you're going to have, because that's money that's taken away from other social programs that have been proven to better society. But those are very expensive and very unpopular, and people don't see the exact link. Even though we know in communities that have very high rates of imprisonment, we know those are communities that have the worst schools, and it's a very direct link.
When you are out on the street, are you mindful? Do you feel like a sense of anger, or is it just uncertainty when you're just making your way home from football practice?
Yeah, I just, you know, it came to the point now where I see a cop, it's like, you might as well not be there. I can't really name a time where a cop really protected me. If anything, my parents or my friends protect me more than cops. Yeah. A coach protect me more than a cop did. So I mean, to me, they haven't had any significant part of my life. So I mean, if they were here, okay. If they're not, that's fine with me.
So what techniques have you had to develop to diffuse that situation?
Well, police officers, the ones I've seen lately, definitely the ones in Virginia, they don't like eye contact. They want you to like look down like you're scared. You don't look down, because that's what makes them want to approach you more. You're looking right in the eye, they stare at you, you stare right at them, and keep going with your business. Don't say anything. Now, if you say something, then they have the right to do what they have to do. If you walk, look at them, show that you're strong. You're strong, they won't mess with you. It's like anybody. You know, a bully, you show that you're strong, they're not gonna mess with you. You're weak, put your head down, look scared, they're gonna mess with you. Yeah. So that's what the cop seems. Matter of fact, exactly right there. That's what a cop is right now. To me, they're trying to bully, because they have power, and they overuse it.
So when you mentioned Trayvon a moment ago, when all of the world was watching what happened down in Florida, there were all these conversations going on about the code and what young black men had to know. And if you don't have a father or a mentor figure to tell you how to negotiate being a black man in America and just in the space of Brooklyn even, all those conversations that happened. So what did Gerald Huggins Sr. teach you before going to Virginia after being put against the wall on your way home from football practice? What was that conversation like if one of those things happened?
Right. My father just basically tells me to just be strong and be respectful. Well, if you're strong and respectful, usually nothing, I'm not going to say nothing happens because, it's life. Stuff happens. But, if you're a strong, respectful young man, then usually good things happen for you. And usually you avoid certain situations. And my father has helped me through a lot of situations I've been through in my life, and I appreciate him a lot for it because there were things that could have gone this way, but I was in the back of my head like, what would my father say? Or I just think if my father's behind me, because my father is a ghost. He seems to pop up out of nowhere. Like I remember, I was
good fathers do.
So I was at school a couple of times. He would just pop up, like, "Oh, what's up, Pop? How you doing?" He never say anything. So I mean, that's how you gotta live sometimes. Just pretend that person that's been loving you, watching your whole life is behind you. Then you make your decision. Usually, you won't do the wrong thing.
So you have the benefit of that guidance. So for someone who doesn't have the benefit of that but could benefit right now from your experience, what would you share with them on how to negotiate those spaces?
Man, me as a mentor. Okay, so let's see. Honestly, I'll just say, just try to avoid any situation you can that will harm you in any way. I know the life we live in, bad economy, you have gangs, all this other stuff, but there are ways of getting around it. Just being out and about, joining some clubs, something, play a sport, just get out and don't be in the house because that's when you get bored and you do things you're not supposed to do, burn down the house or something like that. So just try and be active and just, be happy. And, don't go around moping. Just try and live life because it's short, and, you just got to enjoy it as much as you can.
All right. Thanks for being here, Gerald.
No problem, sir.
Watch this and other Brooklyn Independent Television episodes online at bricartsmedia.org/BIT.